This evening on Where the Road Takes Me, I continue the series The Tale of Three Norries. Once again, I'm in the north side of Cork City, and this week I'm here to feature songwriter John Murphy. Just like John Neville on last week's programme, John has a story to tell, and it's not all about songwriting. Born in England and brought to Cork for adoption, John describes his adoptive parents as dysfunctional and unfit. His childhood was that of a loner, bereft of love, care and attention. But what can make you weaker can also make you stronger. With a loving family now to support him, John has used the kicks in younger life to face the future with optimism, determination, while still making best use of his many talents. How he has done so makes an interesting story, and you're about to hear it on this week's edition of Where the Road Takes Me. Good evening, welcome along, and thank you for joining us. One of John Murphy's talents is songwriting, and this was to the forefront of Cork City Library's project It Seems That History Is to Blame and Cork City Council's 1920 to 1923 commemoration. To commemorate the burning of Cork on December 11th and 12th, 1920, John Murphy was asked to write a number of songs for an album to be entitled Cork 1920, A City in Flames. That he did. The commemorative CD contains 10 originals written by John, and one each by Tim O'Riordan and Cliff Wedgbury. It was a daunting project, which required intense research, and of course, there was the added problem of then recording a CD while COVID-19 was in its full throes. This also meant that a launch and promotional events were out of the question. However, the obstacles were met with commitment, resulting in the album almost selling itself.
I have a couple of friends who are in the south side. They live in near Joe Murphy Road, and they were very keen to get a song to commemorate Joe Murphy, who died on hunger strike 100 years ago in Cork jail. And so they heard that I'd been dabbling in songwriting, so they asked me would I try put something together. So I came up with a song, Ballad of Joe Murphy, and they liked it. So I sang it for them. There was a match between a Belfast GA team and Ballyfihan, and I sang it in the dressing room for them, and there was a video made of it. And a neighbour of mine who works with the Cork Library Service heard the song, and he had previously worked in the Ballyfihan Library on Joe Murphy Road. He was sort of captivated by it, and they'd been brainstorming in the library how they were going to commemorate the centenary of the burning of Cork, because, previously they had done books related to the 1916 Rising and other events. So he decided to approach his boss with the idea of making a CD instead of writing a book. Previously they had written books. His boss decided to go with it, and then he knocked on my door and said, I need you to write 12 songs, just like that. I'm not a historian, so I had a hell of a lot of research to do then. So I said I'd have a try of it. And of course, when you do the research of the sacrifices that were made by these people 100 years ago, you can't help but become passionate about it, and which I did. And I immersed myself in studying about those particular people, men and women. And the songs sort of wrote themselves, to be honest about it.
After the brutal murder of Thomas McCurtain, the IRA reorganised in Cork City and went on to inflict serious damage to the Crown forces in the city and county. To counter this, the British sent in the Black and Tans and the auxiliary forces to Ireland in an effort to bolster the RIC, who were being seriously depleted by mass resignations. Some of these men were officers from the army who had fought in the trenches of World War I. They were extremely brutal in the way they went about their business. The most notorious of all these auxiliaries were K Company, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Latimer.
Lieutenant Colonel Latimer, a servant to the Crown, came to Ireland from his native Coventry. He was stationed in Cork City, such a place of high renown, commanding officer of ADRIC. On the 11th of December, he turned Cork to an ember in response to all attacks on RIC. He was loyal to King George when he put us to the torch, when his auxies went out on the drunken spree. A curse upon the blackguards of Oxyke Company. No bigger band of murderers in Ireland you will find. Bad cess to all Oxyke Company, descendants of Cromwell, may your corpses rot in hell. May the devil call and pay you back in kind. On the night they burned the city down, the whiskey it flowed free as they waited in their barracks, Union Quay. Latimer received his orders all the way from London town. Get revenge for all the fallen RIC. The petrol cans were lined up, incendiary bombs were primed up. Into the city centre they were bound. With grim determination to cause complete devastation, when they burned 200 buildings to the ground. A curse upon the blackguards of Oxyke Company. No bigger band of murderers in Ireland you will find. Bad cess to all Oxyke Company, descendants of Cromwell, may your corpses rot in hell. May the devil call and pay you back in kind. They headed to Dunmanway with intent to burn the town. Reprisal for the Kilmichael victory. They met with Canon Magner and Ty Crowley from the town. They killed them both with vicious cruelty. They caused such an awful melee. They robbed the bank in Dunmanway. Mayhem was the order of the day. They were not punished for their crimes, a sure sign of the times. If right be right, they should have all been put away. A curse upon the blackguards of Oxyke Company. No bigger band of murderers in Ireland you will find. Bad cess to all Oxyke Company, descendants of Cromwell, may your corpses rot in hell. May the devil call and pay you back in kind.
From the CD Cork 1920, A City in Flames, one of the 10 songs written by John Murphy entitled K Company. Each song is accompanied by an introduction. This song outlines the brutal and ruthless company responsible for the burning of Cork. The city would have suffered far greater devastation were it not for the Trojan and heroic work of the Cork Fire Service, who were led by an Englishman called Alfred Hudson. Songwriter John Murphy was born in England. Because of financial and social circumstances, his birth mother made an extremely difficult decision to place her baby for adoption. And this is something we will deal with later in the programme. But this young woman was forced to bring her baby to Ireland on the ferry, and alone, hand her baby over for adoption and make her way back home to England, all alone. Compassion was definitely not one of the virtues you could attribute to those responsible.
I always knew that I was adopted, but I don't ever recall being told that I was by my parents. It was always from the streets. You know, families would kind of single people out for lots of different reasons, and one of them would be adoption. You were sort of second class, or you felt that way anyway, you know. You know, the way children would mock each other, and adoption would be a big one for mocking as well. So I always knew. I didn't think it upset me, really, you know, but in later life, I realised that it actually did. There was a sort of a feeling of isolation. Also, I was the only child in the household anyway, you know, and spent a lot of time alone because my parents, they were sort of dysfunctional. They really weren't fit parents, in my opinion. So I spent a lot of time alone. Like I say, I have no memory of speaking to parents about it at all. It was always from outside sources. And I suppose then later on bring birth certificate to the school. It would be a special one. Everybody else would have a long form birth certificate, but I would have just a very basic certificate with very little information on it, you know. It's sort of a new one that would override the original one. So I knew from then. But I tried never to make it an issue, you know. I never wanted to delve into it at all until very much later in life, when my daughters kind of persuaded me to look into it, and they were entitled to some health information, you know. So I thought that was fair enough. I was compelled to go further about finding out my...
When you brought that different birth cert into school, did that eventually weave its way down to your schoolmates who found out about it? And did they give you a hard time?
Not in school, really. Not in school. No, I can't ever remember it being an issue in school at all. But I was still quite a loner in the school, you know. Like, the living conditions in the house, like, it was very, very, very poor. Like, my father was an alcoholic. My mother had psychiatric problems. So it was a tough place to live. I spent a lot of time on my own, as I say. I know I can make you tough, you know, it's sort of self-survival, but it can make you very weak at the same time. School for me, like, I actually hated all my school time. Couldn't wait to be out of it. Spent a lot of time missing from school, and there were no recriminations at home because...
They didn't care.
They didn't really care, you know.
Yeah.
So I could spend months without going to school, and nobody even asked me for a note. That was the way things were, you know.
And do you believe what you were doing was rebelling against?
Probably was.
Yeah.
Like, in hindsight, probably was. But I had really no backup at all. No, it did make me a bit stronger, all right, you know, psychologically stronger. Or so I thought, but very, very basic education, which I regret, you know, obviously. I would love to have had a better education. I feel I could have done better for myself if I was properly educated and tried a bit of adult education, but I just don't have the discipline, you know.
For John Murphy, having to bring your birth certificate to school was a sure giveaway that you were different. His cert was different, shorter, and contained less information. For instance, in the section Place of Birth, it simply said, England. Was there a reason for the vagueness of the answer? I would imagine yes, for obvious reasons.
I always sort of had a kind of a fondness for England, I suppose, without knowing the full facts, of course, about history. And because at the time, like, comics, like, were the big thing, you know, and it was always English comics, and the characters were all English, and so you'd kind of fantasize about the characters and that, and you felt like that you were the same as them. Yeah, that was the early days like that. Very isolated, very few real friends. I'd be sort of blamed for stuff. No, I was a bold boy, you know. But I'd be blamed for everything. And that kind of worked as well, I suppose. I didn't really care. Externally, I didn't care anyway, you know. You create a kind of a wall around yourself, I suppose.
You were born in England, so you were brought over here then to Ireland to be adopted.
Yeah, I always knew that, but I only found out actually last year at the tribunal into the mother and child homes that there was a concerted effort by the Catholic Church to send back Catholic children that were born to Catholics in the UK, send them back to Ireland because they might lose the faith. I only found that out very recently, and I found it very ironic.
I suppose a lot of people would say there mustn't have been much research into the couple that were going to adopt you if it turned out like that. So how could a baby, because you were a baby, were you, when you were?
I was, yeah. Yeah.
How could a baby end up with a couple that gave you the life that they gave you? Lack of attention, care, love, etc. Your father, you said, was an alcoholic. Your mother then had psychiatric problems. So there mustn't have been much research went into the background here.
Absolutely not. It seems to me like anybody could have shown up and just be given a child at that time. People had large families, of course, and they struggled to make ends meet. And so they were glad to find anybody to take a child. They weren't very religious people that they gave them to either, you know. Yeah. So there was no criteria as regards religion either, as long as they had Catholic stamped on their birth certificate themselves, I suppose, or baptismal lines. I don't think it was even deliberate cruelty, to be honest. It was just sheer neglect, really, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think they were...
there wasn't badness involved.
I don't think they were bad people, no.
It was just the way they were.
Yeah.
And when did you start getting a hard time then? Was it later in life, out on the streets, sort of fizzled through that you were adopted?
Very early on. I thought you might ask me a question like that now, and I was thinking, you know, how far back could I remember? But back in the 60s, now, for instance, people had televisions. We had no television in the house, you know, and you'd be out on the streets playing football. It was always soccer. We lived in sort of a square, you know, and one particular TV show was called The Time Tunnel. Time Tunnel is on. The whole street would empty, but I'd still be on the street, you know, and that kind of stuff, it would hurt you, all right? Definitely would hurt you, and nobody's going to take you in. Plus, like, they were all big families and it had enough people there, you know. So, like, the feeling of isolation was probably the worst part of the neglect.
The Tale of Three Norries, a series which outlines the lives of three friends from Cork City's north side. This is Programme 2, and the story of songwriter John Murphy continues after the break. It's part 2 in Programme 2, The Tale of Three Norries. The Norrie in question this evening is songwriter John Murphy, who also has his own story to tell. Well, John was asked to write songs for a CD to commemorate the burning of Cork in 1920. John duly obliged by writing 10 songs. The other 2 were written by Tim O'Riordan and Cliff Wedgbury. In part 1, we heard one of John's songs sung by Mick Buckley. The song is called K Company and tells the story of the ruthless and callous group who are behind the burning of Cork. John Murphy outlines their background for me.
And they'd only arrived in Cork after the assassination of Thomas McCurtain in March. These people were particularly ruthless, but they were actually, a lot of them were what we would call, post-traumatic shock, or shell shock they would have called it back in the day, from World War I. They were all from the trenches, So these people, they weren't of sound mind really, but yet they were trained killers at the same time. They inflicted terrible cruelty on the people, particularly in Cork. And all over the country really, but K Company based in Cork, they were particularly brutal in the city.
One of the songs is regarding the Cork Fire Service on that night and their bravery, because not only had they to risk their lives putting out a fire, but they had to risk their lives putting out a fire and being shot at the same time. And one of the songs on the CD is all about the head of the Cork Fire Service, who was an Englishman.
Alfred Hudson, he was. That song was composed by a friend of mine called Cliff Wedgbury, who I know from the Cork Singers Club. He's an Englishman himself, but he met and married a Cork woman and lived in Cork, and he loves all things Cork. But he's quintessential Englishman if you meet him, his accent is still there, but he's a thorough gentleman. But I had the idea, I'm a big fan of Ewan McCall and his radio ballads, where he would get a subject and go and interview local people and compose songs about their particular jobs, As you are doing now, John, he would interview people, and I think he coined the phrase actuality, I think he used to call it, where he would intermingle people's voices with songs that he had composed. And those radio ballads are all available on YouTube as well, if anybody wanted to check them out. Masterpieces, in my opinion. But anyway, that's the idea I had for the CD, where I would get some narration about events and then write a song about that particular event. And when I read about Alfred Hudson, the man was incredibly brave, and his fellow firefighters came under fire several times from the blackened hands while Cork was burning. Nevertheless, they said only for him, there were actually no fatalities on the night from the fire, which is absolutely incredible, because a lot of families lived over the shops on Patrick Street. But the firefighters were successful in evacuating all those families with ladders, and there was all sorts of stories of heroism.
My name is Alfred Hudson. I came from the Sussex Downs. Now at 71 years old, I must save this burning town. 30 years a fireman, now I wear the boss's shoes. Superintendent on the job, act now or the city will lose. Act now or the city will lose. Auxiliaries roam the city streets, violent, angry and mad, burning all the buildings, inflamed with a hatred so bad. After the fight at Dillon's Cross, with houses all aflame, incendiary bombs and bullets fly. Just the innocent take the blame. Just the innocent take the blame. From St. Luke's on down to Pana, you can hear the shattering glass, the screaming of the frightened folk as angry auxiliaries pass in their orgy of destruction, looting without care, setting fires swiftly. Smoke and flames rise everywhere. Smoke and flames rise everywhere. Engulfing fine old buildings, see the city glow.
Unroll the hoses quickly, lads, to let the water flow. Ignore the flying bullets, we have a job to do. Our training must be followed, with our hoses aiming true, with our hoses aiming true. Reject intimidation, it is the only way. On this December night of hate, lovely buildings burn away. With a crack of blazing timber, the burst of bullets sound. To quench the flame is the fireman's game, with destruction all around, with destruction all around. This night consumed with hatred, the firemen bring their care, as bullets fly and hosepipes try, quenching ruin everywhere. Reject intimidation, it is the only way. On this December night of hate, lovely buildings burn away, lovely buildings burn away. My name is Alfred Hudson, I came from the Sussex Downs. Now at 71 years old, I must save this burning town. 30 years a fireman, now I wear the boss's shoes. Superintendent on the job, act now or the city will lose. Act now or the city will lose.
And that was Cliff Wedgbury and his own song, The Ballad of Alfred Hudson. Hudson, an Englishman, was in charge of the Cork Fire Service during the burning of Cork in 1920. The Cork Fire Service risked their lives by not only fighting the fires, often after their hoses had been cut, but also dodging the bullets fired in their direction by the infamous K Company. It's ironic, I suppose, but the third Norrie in this series is Tony O'Shea, who's a former Cork City fireman himself. Tony was obliged to retire at the age of 54, an age when all firefighting personnel are now required to retire. But during the burning of Cork, Alfred Hudson, the Cork Fire Chief, was 71 years of age. It's painfully obvious, but also painfully unbelievable, that not the required or necessary or obligatory research went into the background of John Murphy's adoptive parents-to-be. His father was an alcoholic, while his mother had psychiatric problems. While John says that they weren't bad people, they weren't fit parents either. On returning from school, some days his mother would be there, doing her best, but dependent on how good or bad her mental health was at the time.
She would be there, all right, doing her best, but not always. The father very rarely. I can't remember my mother being a big drinker, to be honest, but like she had awful psychiatric problems. I spent many of the time in Our Lady's Hospital visiting the woman, you know, and the back of ambulances after overdosing on medication. So like they weren't good times.
Do you think it made you stronger?
I do. I absolutely do. I probably have a sort of an innate strength anyway, you know, maybe. Because I could see that it could break many a person as well. But I feel very strong for it. Not much will faze me now, you know.
When then did you get interested in locating your birth mother? Or how did that come about? Was it encouragement from the family?
For my two daughters, Deirdre and Jennifer in particular. My wife always suggested, but she would never put pressure on me that way, you know. But my daughters then, they sort of put it up to me that, look, you know, there's possibility of information and we would like to know, like, if there was a family history, you know, of any sort of a degenerative disease or anything such like, you know. And I thought, yeah, they do have a point there. So for that reason, then I went forward and looking for my birth information from the authorities here in down in Sarsfield's Court, and met a fantastic social worker called Judy McSweeney, and she was brilliant. I never ever for the life of me thought that she could find my birth mother, and she did. When I went for an interview with her, I more or less said to her, look, I know you have to go through the motions here, but you're not going to get any information, But she proved me wrong. She was fantastic, and she found information. There was extra information again that I hadn't received, which was the county of birth of my mother, which was Westmeath, and her full name. And based on that, then she was able to track her down to England. And the only other living person that knew of my existence was my birth mother's older sister, who was 90 at the time that Judy found her.
Yeah.
And she was very relieved to tell Judy the information that she had. And 3 months later, she passed away, would you believe? So, there was a complete dead end if we were 3 months later,
Yeah.
Which was sort of an extraordinary situation. So I got a phone number from my birth mother, and I made a phone call, and she said that her own children, she had 3 children herself, nobody knew anything about my existence. But she said she was always waiting for someone to make contact, and she would never deny, and that's how it transpired. And so I met them, and we struck up a bond immediately. And then Sheila, my birth mother, she passed away then about 2 years after that. But I had met her, myself and Bridie, my wife, went there several times and, socialised with them and that. So it was a fantastic experience. And for my daughters, found out that there was good longevity in the family as well. So that was a bit of a bonus for them, I suppose.
To finish part 2, John Murphy sings his own song, The Sandstone Tower, which is also included on the album A City in Flames. Part 3 in Programme 2, the story of songwriter John Murphy, follows after the break.
I have worked in places far from home. From Perth to Brisbane I did roam. Picked fruit near Melbourne by the ton. Was burned in Darwin's scorching sun. But often when I was alone, my mind turned back to thoughts of home, and the rebel city so petite, and Shandon steeple on Church Street, that sandstone tower in the sky, the goldy fish, the clocks that lie, the bells that peal with tuneful song, the steps we climbed, one short, one long. The view on high would melt your heart, the southern jewel of much renown. It always hurts when we're apart, the blood and bandage rebel town. And when my time on earth is done, when my life's journey has been run, just take me home to that old town. In Shandon churchyard lay me down. That sandstone tower in the sky, the goldy fish, the clocks that lie, the bells that peal with tuneful song, the steps we climbed, one short, one long. If there should be an afterlife, and if in heaven I'm allowed, I shall go to Peter and request exclusion from my harp and cloud. For there's no place else I'd want to be than the little city by the lea. So let my spirits weave its spells amongst the sounds of Shandon bells. That sandstone tower in the sky, the goldy fish, the clocks that lie,
The bells that peal with tuneful song, each step we climbed, one short, one long. The bells that peal with tuneful song, that wondrous place where I belong.
Cork, 1920, a city in flames. A CD released to commemorate the burning of Cork City in December of that year. One can only imagine what type of Christmas the business people of Cork had after watching their business premises, which also doubled as their homes, being burned to the ground by the drunken and out-of-control K Company. Diarmid Begley, son of the Crossbarry piper Flor Begley, once told me that in his view, the War of Independence would not have been won if it were not for the brave women of Ireland, most of whom who were members of Cumann na mBan. In Cork, these women were not found wanting either, and it is only right that a song be dedicated to them as we commemorate the burning of our city. On the CD Cork 1920, A City in Flames, John Murphy has written and included a song which is simply called Cumann na mBan. It's sung here by Maureen Céalachair.
Oh, my name is Peg Duggan, and this is my story. I was born near Cork City, a townland just beyond. My sisters and I, Sarah, Bridget and Annie, we were early involved with Cumann na mBan. From the time when they buried O'Donovan Rossa, our allegiance we swore to our own native land. The men folk did fight against abject oppression. The women supported at every command. We concealed many weapons, sometimes on our persons. We offered good shelter to men on the run. We visited prisons, gave comfort and counsel to families, provided good clothing homespun. And often we nursed men, the wounded, the dying, injuries most appalling as ever were seen. We prayed or we cursed as occasions required, saw young men blown apart by infernal machines. Or gahir rev loiduch ta doite is krate, na dinig fullingt go ger. Ni moor doing a chasse ve gwynne and tirnish, is tyrannig a rogert go jo as our dear. Gwymir dan lan av eiger a sirshe, si chassøv go dangen le brodes le nart. Banach de le mor lechre a shairi na heran, oglig na heran is Cumann na mBan. Our own rebel city is sullied and tortured. Our people are suffering to such a degree that we feel it's our duty to stand and be counted and banish the tyrants from our country. I pray for the time when our country knows freedom, and on her own feet she stands proudly upon. So God bless the heroes of Ireland's rebellion, the bold IRA and Cumann na mBan.
I'm not a musician. I've no background in music whatsoever, other than liking music and listening to a lot of music. I started unaccompanied singing about 10 years ago when I got involved with the Cork Singers Club. It took me a long time to build up the courage to actually sing. I used to go and listen to them, and I always had a few songs in me. I didn't have the courage to do it, but my wife was just prompting me to do it. You know, she knew I needed to get over that hurdle, and I eventually did. And after that then it became a bit easier for me. After a few years of learning sort of traditional songs, I got involved in politics with the Socialist Party of Ireland, and during the anti-household tax, anti-water charge campaign, they were looking for somebody to write a song, sort of a warm-up for a big demo. So I said I'd have a go of it, and like the words came easy to me when you know your subject, so I did that and it went very well. And so from then on I started composing songs mainly about social issues, you know, and tried to write a few comic songs along the way as well. And I found I had a bit of a knack for it. But it's all just a hobby, really, you know. I mean, I've never done a live gig or anything like that.
And I suppose the Cork Singers Club then, they don't rush you into singing, you know, take your time, do it whenever you're ready.
Not at all. They never put pressure on anybody. It's on the go, I know, almost 30 years. And the man who runs it is also one of the organisers of the Cork Folk Festival. Jim Walsh is his name, and he's the MC, but he would never ever pressure anybody. But he'd always extend an invitation to people to sing, you know.
Yeah.
And that invitation always stands, you know. And they're great people in there and very respectful of all singers, you know. You could be Pavarotti or Margaret Barry, it doesn't matter. There's a welcome there for any singer. So it's a great place. I'm still involved with the Singers Club. We've kept it going through the pandemic with Zoom, and we've made friends all over the world. I don't know how we're going to deal with that now when we go back to behind four walls, but it's been a good experience.
Did you grow up around here?
I did.
So you would have known Master Neville and Master O'Shea very well?
I knew them from school. I'm from a place called Allen Square, which is very close to where Tony lived. It's just around the corner from him. It was built in the 60s. I went to the North Man. I didn't have a great experience at school. I was a bit of a dunce. I didn't have a good family circumstance, so I never did homework or anything like that, you know. So it was a tough experience for me to school then. And I lasted until intermediate cert year, and we had a disagreement, and so I had to let him go. And I was gone for a while. Then the school approached me to know would I give it another try, come back, which I did. But I was spoiled at that stage. I had been working as a messenger boy around the town, you know, and I tried it for a couple of months and I left again. But to be fair to the school, I had no qualifications whatsoever, and they set me up in a trade as a ceramic tiler, which I still work at to this day, you know, 45 years later. So I'm forever grateful to the school for that, you know. The school is a great establishment. I couldn't fault the school at all. Like, they were very good to me.
With the encouragement and support of his wife Bridie and his two daughters, John went in search of his birth mother. A letter, which she had written to the relevant authorities soon after she had placed John for adoption, was given to him. The letter inquired about the health and welfare of her baby and how he was progressing since she had brought him to Ireland for adoption. This was all he needed to know. From now on, nothing would prevent him from locating her, and nothing did.
I felt very strange.
Apprehensive, I suppose.
Very strange, yeah. I wouldn't be the very most outgoing person myself anyway, you know. It's always laboured if I'm trying to, you know, be sociable. And it was very strange. So we just sat in a room and everybody else left us alone. And she started telling me about her experience. And it's horrific. Like, part of the stipulation by the authorities, the church authorities at that time, was that the person who had the baby in the UK would have to bring the baby back in person to Ireland, you know.
Yeah, themselves.
Yeah. It's incredible. Like, can you imagine what they went through in the first place? And apparently, my birth mother was concealing her pregnancy for as long as she could. In her job, she worked as a hotel maid at that time in London, so concealing that for as long as possible, and then give birth to the child, and you know how that could be, and then to hand over the child, but to actually get on a boat with the child as well. I often wonder how many of them went overboard on the way back, you know. It was just horrific to think about it.
So your mom had to bring you, her son, her baby, over to Ireland, hand you over for adoption, and then get the boat back on her own again.
Yeah.
A certain amount of cruelty involved there, isn't there?
Certainly was cruel, wasn't it? Certainly was. And also, when I was going about it, making the first steps to the Adoption Society, they handed me a handwritten letter that she had sent about 6 months later, inquiring as to the health of the baby, you know. And that was a kind of a deal breaker for me then, because it told me like that, you know, she did it against her will, you know, she had no choice, you know.
Yeah.
And so then I was full on then at that stage looking for information. So, you know, it was a great result.
So for her, she was in difficult circumstances. She felt she couldn't raise you, and this was her only option.
Her only option.
Yeah, at the time, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you had 2 years with her, which was great. Your timing was good in both senses.
Very, very lucky.
With your aunt and with your mom, your birth mom. Yeah.
Very, very lucky, yeah. And I do feel that it's been of great benefit to myself, you know, psychologically and physically, because I have 2 half-brothers and sister, you know, good friends. So it's all good.
It would be difficult to comprehend that any moment of humour would emerge from such a horrific time during the burning of Cork. However, one small nugget of information told by one of the firemen on duty suggests that there was. John Murphy has written a song about it and included it in the album A City in Flames. The song is introduced by Jerry Miller and sung by Oliver Dinsmore. The song is called Sonny Jim.
Despite the awful carnage perpetrated by the British that night, there were also moments of humour. One story in particular was relayed by a member of the Cork Fire Brigade, who told a story about a black and tan who approached him while dampening a building in Cook Street. This tan was drunk and apologised for the conduct of his countrymen. He proceeded to waltz along the street with the fireman.
I'm Sonny Jim from Wolfenstall, a man of 4 degrees. I likes me drink, me snouts, me necks. Now come for a waltz with me. I had to hightail from me native town on account of a baby or 3. I joined with these crazy black and tans to travel the world for me. But I landed in Cork at the height of trouble, with a target pinned on my back. I never fired a shot in anger. Aggression is something I lack. Come on, Mr. Fireman, put out that oil. Have some of my whiskey. Watch me get rid of this notchless rifle and come for a waltz with me. I'm Sonny Jim from Wolfenstall, a man of 4 degrees. I likes me drink, me snouts, me necks. Now come for a waltz with me.
And so this evening you've met the second of our 3 Norries, songwriter John Murphy, who was articulate in the telling of what must have been a difficult story to recount. Thank you, John. Next week, former Cork City fireman, singer, and son of the late John O'Shea, who was affectionately known as the Singing Fireman, Tony O'Shea completes the trilogy in the tale of 3 Norries. My thanks to Ken Perrott, who was on sound this evening. Until Sunday evening next at 7, from myself, John Green, have a good and safe week. Thanks for dropping by.